Have you ever wondered how one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen just falls apart? Today, we're diving into that exact story. We're going to look at how the mighty Roman Empire collapsed and what rose from the ashes to become the Europe we know today.
But first, let's start with a big question. What actually holds a society together? I mean, really, think about it. Is it an army? Is it shared beliefs? Laws? Keep that question in the back of your mind, because honestly, it is the key to this entire story.
All right, so to understand how something breaks, you first have to see it when it was working perfectly. So let's wind the clock back to a time when the Roman Empire wasn't just a superpower, it was pretty much the entire world for a lot of people.
I want you to picture it. It's around the year 100 CE. If you're living inside the Roman Empire, life is, well, it's pretty stable. You've got roads, you've got security, you've got trade. It was a golden age of peace and prosperity, a time people would look back on for centuries.
But you know how these things go. That golden age couldn't last forever. It turns out even the mightiest empires can be surprisingly fragile. So now, let's look at how this incredible, massive structure started to crack and eventually crumble.
So what went wrong? Well, there was no single killer blow. It was more like a death by 1,000 cuts. For starters, the empire was just too big. It was under constant attack on its borders, which meant they needed a gigantic, super expensive army. Then you have what the Romans called barbarian invasions, basically huge groups of people migrating and putting massive pressure on those borders. But maybe the biggest problem? It was coming from the inside.
And that brings us to a really key term, civil war. While Rome was trying to fight off enemies on the outside, it was also literally fighting itself. Ambitious generals and politicians were constantly battling for power, tearing the empire apart from within. It was absolute chaos.
So you've got this perfect storm of pressure from the outside and rotting from the inside. It just couldn't last. It all came to a head in one specific year, 476 CE. That's the date most historians point to as the official end of the Western Roman Empire. And just like that, the central power that had held Europe together for centuries was gone.
So what happens when the lights go out? What's life like for the average person when the government, the army, everything just disappears? Well, Europe plunged into a period we now call the Dark Ages. And to put it mildly, it was a really tough time to be alive.
Life completely changed. Without Roman soldiers, cities became super dangerous. With no one protecting the trade routes, the economy collapsed and food became scarce. So what did people do? They fled to the countryside just to find food and safety. And in all that chaos, incredible knowledge, things like engineering, medicine, philosophy, was just lost.
And as if all that wasn't bad enough, an invisible enemy showed up, the plague. It was carried by rats, spread by fleas, and it just swept across a continent that was already broken and vulnerable. And the impact was just catastrophic. I want you to let this number sink in. Nearly half of the entire population of Europe died. It's a scale of death that is almost impossible for us to even imagine today.
Out of all this devastation, a new way of life had to emerge. It was called feudalism. For most people, it meant you became a serf. Now, this wasn't quite slavery, but it was close. You were tied to the land you worked. In exchange for your labor, a local lord gave you a tiny plot of land to grow your own food and, most importantly, protection. It was a tough trade, your freedom for your safety.
Okay, I know, it's a bleak picture. But here's the amazing thing about human history. Even in the darkest times, we find a way. And in this story, the first spark of recovery came from something you'd probably never expect, a single, simple tool. Take a look at this timeline. You can see that long stretch of the early Middle Ages, basically 500 years of struggle. But then, look what happens right around the year 1000. Things start to turn around. We enter what's called the High Middle Ages, and life finally starts getting better.
And this is what started it all. I know, it doesn't look like much, does it? But this heavy, wheeled plow was a complete game changer. Why? Because it could finally break up the thick, heavy clay soils of Northern Europe, something the old Roman plows just couldn't do.
And what happened next was this incredible chain reaction. It's pretty simple, really. Better plows mean farmers can grow way more food. More food means people are healthier, they live longer, and the population starts to boom. And when you have more people, well, you need new towns for them to live in and new trade routes to connect them all.
This agricultural revolution, slowly, piece by piece, rebuilt society from the ground up. It allowed for more complex communities, like the manor system you see here. A whole new way of life started to emerge from the shadows, kicking off the era we now call the High Middle Ages.
So there you have it, from the peak of a massive empire, down into a dark collapse, and then a slow, steady climb back up, all sparked by a simple tool. It's an amazing story of how societies can fall, but also how they can rise again. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What simple innovations are out there, right now, quietly rebuilding our world today?